which is the Bench of Bishops report. You have in your papers the report, which you will have read, and I now invite the Bishop of Monmouth, Bishop Cherry, to come and give an overview of that report for us.
Archbishop, Chair, members of governing body, Cherry Van, Bishop of Monmouth, ex officio. As members will be aware, the Bench provides a report to the governing body at each of its meetings, and you'll have seen and noted the summary report amongst your papers for this meeting. The report provides an overview of the matters that the bishops have been engaged with, and you'll see that we've met more or less monthly since the last governing body. We followed our now usual pattern of 3-day residential meetings, which involve a full day of private retreat and day-long business-focused meetings. We've also had the latest in our series of bishops' training sessions, that being on episcopal power. I don't intend to go through the report in great detail, but simply to draw your attention to a few matters. You'll see that the bishops have started a practice of providing an overview of the work within our portfolios. This gives us the opportunity to discuss our portfolios in a rounded, holistic way, rather than just talking about individual matters or issues as they arise. We intend to extend this practice to the governing body to give you an insight into these important areas of work, some of which often go on slightly out of the limelight. In a short while, I, together with Tristan Hughes and Jeremy Duff, will give an overview of the work in my portfolio, the ministry portfolio. And you'll see from the report some of the ministry-related areas of work that the Bench has been involved with over the last few months, including the introduction of an MDR scheme for bishops, which the bishops are now engaging with, an MDR scheme for LLMs, and the approval of refinements to the provisional discernment process. More on that in our next item. As detailed in the report, the Bench has met with the Director of Faith, Order and Unity, Ainsley Griffiths, and the report makes reference to the Walking in Integrity report, prepared over the past year or so by the Standing Doctrinal Commission, which considers spiritual authority and the use, and unfortunately the misuse of it. You'll see that a small working group is now considering how to turn this highly detailed and thoughtful document into ministerial action. The group met for the first time at the beginning of this month. The report, together with its partner introductory document, is available on the provincial website, and if you haven't already, I encourage you to read it. It includes a superb piece of theological reflection. On behalf of the Bench, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all those involved in undertaking this significant piece of work, some of whom I know are present here today. You'll be aware that the Bench instigated a listening exercise earlier this year in order to hear and discern the views of the wider Church in Wales on the matter of same-sex relationships. The 5-year experimental period for the liturgy for the blessing of those in same-sex couples who have formalised their unions via civil marriage or civil partnerships comes to an end in 2026, and we need to consider what to do next. These listening sessions have been taking place in all 6 dioceses, and I imagine that many of you here will have either attended one or intend to attend one. The introductory video prepared by the Archbishop is not going to be played here today, but any who wish to see it, would you please contact John Davis, who will send it to you. Again, can I thank Ainsley Griffiths for drawing together a comprehensive list of resources to aid our reflection and engagement on this important matter. Finally, And before I conclude and ask the Chair to invite questions on the report, you'll know both from the report and from a separate communication that the bench has introduced a bill to bring a new confirmation right into use. The bill was received by the Standing Committee in February and was published to the governing body shortly afterwards. I believe the window for the submission of amendments to the draft bill has now passed, and the Select Committee stage of work is underway, with the intention of the bill being debated at governing body in September. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Cherry. Governing body is now invited, if they wish to come and ask questions or make comments on the content of Bishop Cherry's report, the Bishop's report, please do come forward now to the podiums.
Stella Bailey, nominated Archdeacon for Monmouth. I wish to offer my thanks to the bench of bishops for releasing the full report, Walking with Integrity. And my thanks also go to all those who worked on the paper. If you haven't yet read it, I commend it to the governing body. Walking with Integrity is an excellent piece of practical and biblically rooted theological thinking about the use of power and the much coined term spiritual abuse. It offers us a deeper insight into when leadership tips over into spiritual abuse and when leadership becomes about control and power. As a province, we should be proud of this thinking, and I believe we have something which is of worth and can be offered to the wider church across denominations and the Anglican province. Therefore, my question is this. Beyond this paper being something for us internally, at the moment hidden in a part of our website where you need to know where it is to find it, and beyond informing our own training and development, would the bench give serious consideration to sharing this theological thinking through a Welsh lens with the wider church by publishing the paper more widely and even being so bold, courageous and proud as to give it a press release?
Do we have any other questions or comments? Yes.
Hannah Rowan, elected member for Monmouth Diocese. I'm sorry you don't have more questions because I would have liked a little bit more time to say this succinctly, so I'll do my best. I really welcome the Walking in Integrity report, and I think, as Archdeacon Stella just said, it's really positive that we're doing this. I think the question, as always, is how do our intentions show up in reality, and how do we talk about that while it's a work in progress? So I think most of us, in a sense, this work's been done because we recognise that this stuff is hard. Managing holding power is hard. Feeling like you don't have power is hard. But actually, it's a difficult thing. So it's great that the work's been done. I'm mindful, however, of the risk that as we walk on this journey, there's a risk of things getting lost because of behaviour not quite matching up to what we've said we want to do. And I suppose my question is, how do we make visible and speak honestly about our journey towards perhaps better use of power and kind of integrity around that without seeming like we're congratulating ourselves for, oh, yeah, great, we've done this work. And actually people are saying, yes, but I raised this and was just shut down, or I was told, oh, you best not say anything because, you're waiting on your, paperwork or your next promotion or, whatever it may be. And I think I can see kind of tentative nods around the room. We start from wherever we start from, and that's right and that's fine. But I suppose just want to kind of offer that question and maybe a comment for thought around how do we speak honestly about this and don't seem to be congratulating ourselves too soon, and also so that people don't just roll their eyes and say, well, this is a nice new initiative, it'll go away again in a few years, because it's clearly vital, and I'm delighted to hear that we've put the time and energy into it, and really wonderful as well to hear that the bench themselves, because, are leading from the front in terms of having this training and discussion, Apologies, that was a little waffly, but I hope it's made sense. Thanks.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, Bishop Cherry, if you'd like to respond.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Archdeacon Stella, for your comment and question. We can certainly share it more widely. The bench is meeting again next week, and we can discuss how we might do that, both more publicly and with our ecumenical partners as well. So we've certainly noted that, and we'll take that forward. Thank you, Hannah. Your question, comments, reflections are really important and absolutely spot on. And I have to say that the session that the bench did with an expert in power, helping us to reflect on how we use our power well and wisely, and what to look out for so that we don't misuse it and abuse it, was absolutely first rate. And I think we've all benefited from both what she shared with us and how she helped us on our journey to self-reflect on the power we have and how we use it. I think it's something that we have to do across the board. This isn't just for bishops, it's not just for clergy and licensed lay ministers, it's for everybody. I think some of the things that we're doing are with our ordinands and with our those in the discernment process. I know Tristan has been working very hard with the DDOs and the directors of ministry and through the provincial discernment panel to try and embed these kinds of things right from the beginning. We've also got, you'll notice in the report, a very short paragraph on page 3, standards in licensed ministry. The Bishop Mary and I have been working on with a group to look at codes of behaviour that is going to be brought back to the standing committee at its meeting later this month. And that's absolutely about behaviours, attitudes, and how we really begin to not just live out, but consciously understand and work through what it means to live well and be aware of our power and how we use or misuse it. So really important question, Hannah, and it's something I think that we need to be held to account on, so that we're all mindful that this is something that we all need to attend to in the church.
Thank you, Bishop Cherry, but please don't go too far, because as we move on now then to Agenda 18, that's the Bishop's portfolio report with the Ministry Development Report and then the annual report from St Padans Institute. Bishop Cherry, we're in your hands again.
Thank you very much, Chair, Archbishop, members of governing body. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce this session on the portfolio for which I have responsibility on behalf of the bench ministry. And it's a big brief to hold. Seen in its totality, ministry is far more than the work of the clergy, licensed lay ministers and commission ministers, important though they are. And it extends beyond the core work of St Padans, whose job is to provide the training and formation for those called to some form of licensed ministry, important though that is. Ministry is the work of the whole people of God. We're commissioned at our baptism to shine as lights in the world and to join the body of Christ in continuing Christ's work. And so, whether we're 6 weeks, 6 years, or 60 years old at our baptism, we're called into ministry, to use our gifts of character and personality and the specific gifts God has blessed us with in the service of the gospel. Indeed, St Peter, in his first letter, refers to the laos, the people of God, as a royal priesthood, with a specific ministry to exercise in proclaiming the mighty acts of God in word and deed, with who we are and all that God has blessed us with. It's against this backdrop and out of the community of faith that is the body of Christ that individuals are called into ordained licensed lay and commissioned ministries. DDOs and vocations advisors can only work with those members of our congregations who have begun to discern God's call on their lives. St. Padans can only work with those that the church sends them for training and formation. This means that we have to be more intentional in nurturing the laity in their discipleship and understanding of vocation, especially if we want to see more people being called into some form of formal ministry. If we want to see a more diverse cohort of ministers, then we need a church that is more diverse, one whose congregations better reflect the diversity of the communities in which they're set and which they are called to serve. In other words, ministry in all its outworkings has implications for evangelism, discipleship, and the encouraging and nurturing of vocations. This is the work of us all, not just the clergy, except that it is the job of the clergy to build up and empower the laity through preaching and teaching, through prayer and formation, through offering the sacraments and the ministry of reconciliation, so that they grow into the missionary and evangelistic people they are called to be. I know Simon Lloyd won't mind me sharing with you what he shared with me when reflecting on his recent holiday in India. Simon was struck that people so readily and so unashamedly shared their faith. He told me of 2 guides in particular. One was on a bus following a visit to a temple, when the guide began to speak openly without any prompting about his Hindu faith. The other was on a visit to the Golden Temple, where the Sikh guide spoke about his faith and the welcome and hospitality his community extends to rich and poor, Sikh, and those of other faiths and none. Faith was spoken about naturally, with a quiet confidence and without any hint of embarrassment. Perhaps that's the kind of culture we need to cultivate for ourselves within our own churches and congregations, for that too is ministry. All that said, we can rejoice in the work being done to support, encourage, and equip the clergy and licensed lay ministers with which God has blessed us. Before I hand over to Tristan, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank him formally for all the work he's doing on our behalf. The report that you have in front of you is a testament to the range of areas in which he's involved and the sterling work he's doing, both with and alongside others, to improve and enhance the ministerial work of the church on a range of levels. You'll see at the end of the report an intention to develop ways of fostering more vocations to ordained and licensed lay ministry through initiatives at provincial and diocesan level. Plans are coming together and will be developed in the coming months, though, as I've already noted, the work we all need to be doing in evangelism and discipleship is going to be critical to our ability to foster the number and diversity of lay and ordained ministers that we both want and need. I'd also like to thank Jeremy for his work as Principal of St. Padans and for all that he and his team do in the formation and training of licensed lay ministers at the beginning, middle, and end of their ministerial lives. Jeremy will be speaking to the St. Padans report after Tristan. But first, a short video. This was taken at the 3rd and most recent ministry conference last March, when the focus was on well-being in ministry.
clergy and those in ministry give so much of themselves to others. They walk alongside people in their communities in times of joy and in times of sorrow. And they offer love and compassion and support. But I suppose the question is, who's looking after them? Who's offering them love and who's offering them compassion and support? The weight of expectations, the constant demands of ministry, the pressures of pastoral care, they can all lead to significant stress, even exhaustion and burnout. The Church in Wales recognises that it needs to do more to care for its clergy and ministers. The right support needs to be in place so we can help people maintain their emotional well-being and their mental well-being. When clergy are cared for, they can serve their communities with renewed joy and they can feel free to share the good news of Jesus.
One of the great things about this ministry conference and looking at well-being is the opportunity, A, to see what dioceses are already doing to support their clergy with well-being, but also to look at what plans are in place provincially to support clergy well-being. I'm really hopeful that we've got a raft of things now that we're putting in place that will enable clergy to feel more supported and to look after themselves and for us to look after one another.
Felly bod wedi ddiddorol iawn i ffindio mas yr cymorth sydd ar gael a'r gwahanol strategaethau sydd yn eu lle yn barod yn yr Eglwys yn Cymru.
It's a fabulous role that we're doing. It really is. It's such a joyful role that we need to care for ourselves as well as for other people that we care for.
If we can foster this culture of care in the church, it will benefit everyone. And we can make sure that those in ministry don't just simply survive, but they thrive. Tristan Owen Hughes, Director of Ministry Development for the province. Dwi am dechrau yn y Gymraeg. I'm going to start in Welsh.
Well, I want to take a few minutes now to highlight two exciting projects from the past year, beginning with our focus on well-being in ministry. In the video you've just watched, you may have noticed reference to the Advancing Clergy Reflection Programme, and you will definitely hear more about this, I hope, in the coming years. Those in ministry have the privilege of walking with people in life's special moments, like baptisms and weddings, and offering hope and presence in times of suffering. But that takes its toll. Ministry is deeply rewarding, but it's also tough, and it can be lonely. From my own experience of 20 years as a curate, chaplain, and then church leader, I know how the pressures and expectations build up for those in the ministry. And the pandemic added to this even further, leaving many clergy weary and bruised.
I've recently seen friends buckle under the weight of ministry. Some taking sick leave, others leaving their vocation entirely. One colleague, in a moment that captured that strain perfectly, stood up to preach and began juggling apples in the pulpit, adding more and more until they all fell to the floor. This is ministry, he said. And he listed the many roles that clergy juggle daily. And he asked, is it any wonder that we drop the apples? He then announced he was stepping down from ministry. 10 years earlier, he'd been my student at St. Mike's, as it was then. He'd been full of hope, full of energy. Now, exhausted, his story made local headlines and the press asked the question, does the church really care about its clergy? Well-being generally is now more openly discussed in our society, and many professions have built-in support systems. But has the church kept pace? Are we offering the structures needed to care for those who care for others? Without the support they need, those in ministry often face isolation, anxiety, and burnout. That's where we want to make a difference. You'll see in the report a number of well-being initiatives for both ordained and lay ministers. We're working with partners internally with St Padans, where we're organising a mid-ministry course, and with our HR team putting together a clergy wellbeing questionnaire, with Go Health, used to be called the Guild of St Raphael, with Clergy Support Trust, and with Cynnal Counselling for Clergy and Families. And these partnerships are key in helping us listen well and respond with care. One thing I personally would have valued most during my time in pastoral ministry was someone outside of my immediate circle to talk to. A confidential space to process the highs and the lows of pastoral life. I used to talk to my wife about all my stresses and pressures until one day she finally snapped, "Doesn't the church provide someone else you can talk to, Tristan?" But she was right. What I needed was someone just one step removed. And most of my colleagues were in the same boat and are still in the same boat. So we're launching a new initiative with St Luke's for Clergy Wellbeing, the Advancing Clergy Reflection Programme. At its heart, it provides a safe, confidential space for clergy to reflect on their ministry. We're starting with around 40 clergy across Wales who will receive monthly one-to-one pastoral supervision. These sessions will be led by pastoral supervisors who have been trained, as you'll see on the screen, through Wesley House, Cambridge. And here are our 12 newly trained supervisors, you'll recognise some of them, joining the 5 who are already trained across Wales. And our hope is that this will be an incredible gift, a gift to those who serve our communities so faithfully. And yes, it may be just a small step. 40 clergy is a drop in the ocean, but we hope it will grow. We hope it will grow into a much wider culture of reflection, of support, and of care for those in ministry. But now I want to take you to another exciting move in ministry development. Just as we asked whether care for those in ministry had moved with the times, so we also ask the same question for the discernment of lay and ordained ministers. So we've worked hard over the past few years to make the discernment process fit for purpose, creative, contemporary, reflective of life in 21st century Wales. Our first step was to update the discernment criteria for ordained and licensed lay ministry so that they're clear, they're accessible, and they're practical. They're now not known as criteria to be met, but they're known as qualities to be inhabited. And that shift moves away from the sense that candidates are being assessed in a kind of test or an exam. And the new qualities include reference for the very first time to safeguarding. They include reference for the very first time to the Welsh culture and Welsh language. And they include reference for the very first time to enabling youth work and enabling children's work. So next, we transformed the discernment panels into a 2-stage provincial process, One of our core aims was to widen access to ministry, ensuring the process works for people of all ages, people of all backgrounds, people of all experiences. The journey, as you'll see, now involves a call to ministry, but it also involves a stage 1 online panel, work with a DDO in the diocese, a diocesan panel, and then a stage 2 residential panel. Stage 1 uses an online carousel format with 6 short creative conversations between candidates and provincial discerners. For example, in one conversation, candidates reflect on a picture, or if they prefer, a Bible verse, and you'll see some of those pictures on the screen. In another conversation, they respond to a professionally acted video showing a pastoral scenario. In yet another conversation, they choose a film that has inspired them, or a book, or a TV series, or a newspaper article, just to start the discussion off. The panel aims to build candidate confidence and also to give feedback on areas for development. And one candidate contacted our chair saying she enjoyed it so much she really wanted to do it again. Now, stage 2 is a 3-day residential, much like the provincial discernment panel as it used to be, but has further depth, further reflection, and we've introduced some key changes here. We've ensured strong pastoral care for the candidates that come to us. We've ensured that we support Welsh language needs. We've prioritised safeguarding in the discussions, and we've affirmed a range of church traditions and spiritualities in the panel itself, but also in the worship that is at the panel. So this whole new 2-stage discernment process is rigorous, it's theologically grounded, but it's also welcoming. It's affirming, it's accessible. And such a process will help us to discern ministers who are diverse, ministers who are spiritually mature, ministers who are compassionate, ministers who are truly representative of the communities that they're called to serve. Renewing this discernment process is a sign of the Church in Wales's deep commitment to raising up leaders with integrity, with imagination, and with hope for the Church in Wales in the 21st century. And that leads very nicely to our next update from Professor Jeremy Duff, the Principal of St Padans.
Jeremy Duff, Principal of St Padans. It is a pleasure to be with the governing body this morning and speak a little about the St Padans Institute. You have had the St Padans 2023-2024 annual report in your pack of papers. I hope you've enjoyed that and it's given you a little taste of life at St Padans. There will be an opportunity for questions later, and as always, please do contact me if you have any questions or suggestions. We are the Church in Wales's Institute for Theological Education, Training, Ministerial Development and Research. But like all institutions, from the outside, it can look a bit confusing. Therefore, this slide is trying to set out clearly what we do in the language and structure of the strategic direction which our bishops have set for us. As you can see, there are 4 key areas, those squares, 4 key areas: the Theology for Life programme, Formation for Licensed Ministry, that's ordained and lay licensed ministry in all their variety, newly licensed ministers, the work with curates and their lay licensed equivalents, and ongoing continual ministerial development. And you also see there the two supporting areas of postgraduate courses and the various national networks we support. And of course, very importantly, we are a Christian learning community, which in order to serve the Church in Wales well, needs to be at the top of its game, organisationally, professionally, and prayerfully. But this morning, I want to highlight 4 points in the ongoing life of St Paddens, and then comment briefly on St Paddens' contribution to that key agenda about well-being, which Bishop Cherry and Tristan have highlighted. First of all, though, numbers. Across St Paddens overall, numbers are decent. Some ups and downs in different programmes, you would see the details in the report, but solid. There's always change. For example, our MA in theology this year happens to be used by a lot of our ordinands, when in the previous couple of years, most of the participants were clergy pursuing further study. The key number the governing body tends to be interested in is the number of stipendiary ordinands, or ordinands working full-time intending for stipendiary ministry. That is remaining very steady. In fact, slightly up this year compared to last year, but fundamentally steady. And about a third of those are under 30, and that younger group is split equally between men and women. The reason for the graphic, though, is that generally across the UK, ordinand numbers are notably going down. The Church of England, for example, over the last couple of years has experienced a 40% drop in ordinands spread right across the colleges and courses. That's a 44% drop in full-time ordinands. That, with some justification, of course there's lots of argument, with some justification is attributed to the impact of COVID on the discernment processes and church life. But of course, we had COVID here too. So steady numbers is actually good news. It is, I believe, a testament to the coherent, joined-up work here in Wales, in our diocese, in Tristan's work, in the discernment boards, and yes, through the flexible forms of training provided by St Paddens. Second, we're always seeking to enhance the formation we offer, listening to the church and taking the feedback from our learners really seriously. Two aspects of what's happening at the moment are both connected to the fact that we are not Cardiff, we serve the whole church in Wales. First, more engagement and more staff engagement and investment with our part-time candidates, generally those training for lay licensed or non-stipendiary ordination who train alongside having a job. That is a really difficult calling. Balancing the desire for training in depth with the realities of work and family demands. But we're trying to make some changes, such as making the formational groups led by staff rather than by volunteers, and to pay more attention to this key part of our work with all sorts of small changes to increase the sense of belonging for those part-time candidates. And secondly, we're making changes to our full-time ordination training to reduce travel to Cardiff by about 20%. Shifting the focus of some of the key formational work to be done regularly in regions, which also opens up new opportunities for engagement with our diocese. Third, we've been developing some new focused CMD offerings. This photo here is from the celebration at the end of the recent course for spiritual directors. Spiritual direction, important for well-being, a key thing for many clergy. We need to attend to the supply of spiritual directors as well. In the pipeline is an opportunity for mid-ministry reflection, which Tristan has already mentioned, and a significant new investment in a programme for ministers with enhanced responsibilities, which should be launched at the end of the year, to invest in the ongoing development of clergy. Many clergy colleagues are tackling really challenging roles of all sorts of different sorts, which go beyond being a parish priest for the first time. And as a church, we need to invest in them as they step up to the next level of challenges. And fourthly, I'm sure that most of you are aware of the significant challenges faced by theology in our Welsh universities at the moment, continuing a trend from the last 2 decades. We're moving into a situation in which it is the churches, not the church in Wales alone, but the churches together, who are going to need to be the bedrock of serious theological study in Wales. And indeed, to ensure that in the next generation, there will be people who can translate from Hebrew into Welsh. As the landscape changes, the Church in Wales' decision 10 years ago to create St Paddens seems more visionary and necessary. But please do pray that together as Christians in Wales, we can work out the right ways to move forward theology in Wales. Finally, to return to the theme of well-being, I want to share with you a few aspects of how St Paddens seeks to work for the flourishing of ministers lay and ordained in Wales. Yes, we might have different programmes, but a few words about our underlying culture, which I think makes some connections and allows us to contribute. We put prayer and vocation right at the heart of what we do, from our engagement with ordinands through to the principles at the heart of the MDR scheme, which re-emphasise prayer and vocation. Prayer and vocation is foundational for ministry lifelong. We create enduring relationships because St Paddens works not just with, from a clergy point of view, not just with ordinands, but also with curates and in CMD, all the way through to pre-retirement courses. We aim to provide that continuing assurance that people are known and remembered and can connect back in throughout the changes of life and ministry. Peers and networks. St Paddens brings together people from across all of our dioceses. We help people to be and to feel part of the big picture. And that's particularly important for people who have maybe more specialist ministries or who feel different for whatever reasons, that in that bigger picture they can find, I think what's now called, they can find their tribe, places, people's peers, networks where they feel at home. We help the church knit together right across Wales. And people thrive when they find themselves in those networks and relationships right across the nation. We do believe that being competent increases confidence and leads to higher well-being. If as an institution we can build up ministerial skills, that makes a real impact. Of course, there is more to ministry than being able to preach a good sermon. But if every time you think about needing to preach, you feel out of your depth, your well-being plummets. Finally, and most importantly, we believe in the Church in Wales, that under God, as a church, we can thrive and indeed are thriving and flourishing in all sorts of ways in all sorts of places. That isn't to be complacent about the challenges, particularly the pressure on clergy, lay licensed ministers and MAC members, nor to be irrationally optimistic. But deep in St Paddens' culture is hope and courage and prayer to the God who raises the dead. Cynicism kills well-being. We don't do cynicism. And we don't do everything good must be across the border. We celebrate weekly, we really do celebrate weekly, and tell the stories, the great things that we see God doing here, now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much to both Tristan and to Jeremy. I'm going to hand back to the chair in a minute for any questions or comments, reflections that you may have. But I'd like to advise you, we've got 45 minutes until 1 o'clock. We would like to spend some time after any questions that you have, just to have 10 minutes or so in roundtable discussions, twos, threes, half tables, around what you see as being the priorities for ministry for the Church in Wales in the coming 5 years. Ministerial priorities that you would like to see us as a bench, Tristan in his role, Jeremy and St Padans focus on in the next 5 years. So hopefully we'll have time after the questions to do that piece of work.
So thank you. The floor is open. The floor is open to invite comment or question on the report received.
Thank you, Chair. Ruth Rowan, Co-opted Cleric, Diocese of Monmouth. It's really encouraging to hear that hope and realism are the bedrock of the work that both Tristan and Jeremy have talked about. In light of that, I'd like to ask a specific question about the newly licensed ministers programme as outlined in the St Padans report, recognising that the report is from 23-24, so we're always looking slightly backwards. You've outlined really clearly, and I think really helpfully, that the newly licensed ministers programme comes in two phases. There's a core phase, and then there's what you've called the, I think, intentional leadership phase. And that the core phase is for all those who've been licensed, and the intentional leadership phase is primarily, and in my experience, almost exclusively attended by those in stipendiary posts. The reality of ministry now is that leadership roles, significant leadership roles, are held by non-stipendiary ministers, and that there is permeability, cross-fertilisation between non-stipendiary and stipendiary posts. So those who have trained and started their curacies as non-stipendiary ministers might then take posts of first responsibility with stipends and vice versa. I wonder if we could think about whether it's the right decision to hold that intentional leadership training for those with stipends, given that in the church as it is today, non-stipendiary ministers have really serious responsibilities for leadership, and that some of those people who we've been training as non-stipendiary ministers might then move into stipendiary roles and take on those leadership responsibilities as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hayley Matthews, elected St Asaph. I welcome these reports, and it's been really exciting to see the developments both in St Padans and in these particular courses, and I look forward to seeing what the future holds for them. But I do wonder if there is a gap, and it's something that as a former principal of a school of theology I have long been concerned by, and that is that those not selected, how we manage their pastoral care and their ongoing guidance for their vocations. Because while we call the process discernment, spiritually, psychologically and emotionally, by the time people get to the process, both they, their partners, their wider families, including the church family, have fully invested, and the individual has imagined themselves into the vocation to which they believe they are being called. Therefore, whether it's during selection or training that the avenue is closed for whatever reason, this is received as a wholesale rejection of self and of their own spiritual discernment and of local spiritual discernment. It can feel immensely humiliating as they return back to their communities of faith and have to explain to their families, to their employers, bearing the weight and the responsibility of that no. I wonder whether the vocations team could let us know what might be done to prevent those people just having to ricochet around looking for that pastoral care, so that we can support those individuals in a meaningful way and support their discipleship so that they are supported into new and unexpected futures that are fruitful, enabling them to continue being joyful disciples in active service rather than carrying an open wound that risks infecting their spiritual and mental health for years to come.
Tony Mullins, Lay, Llandudno. I worked in a very busy general hospital as a qualified social worker for 24 years. And I was never stressed. I was busy. I was extremely busy, and I was ridiculously busy. But I could walk away from my job, my work, having done the best I could. I wasn't guaranteed breaks. And I see something similar to a cleric, because I work very closely with our current incumbent, who will accept a call at 11:45 in the night. I mean, he's amazing. He's very approachable. But he's not looking after himself that way, and I see this. So my question to the bench, and I applaud the report, but my question is, would it not be advantageous to have a double-edged sword on this one, to produce a leaflet or a pamphlet that could be given out to members of the congregation to explain there are certain things that we can do to enhance the ministry of our incumbent by not bothering him in certain times, or her, and look at the impact of unnecessary pressures from the pews up, because I think a lot of people actually react adversely because of the ridiculous pressure that comes at them from the pews up on occasions. So it's a simple question. Would it be useful to educate the laity in the pews as to the tremendous job that priests do on our behalf?
Bex Bristow, elected lay for St Asaph. My question is regarding the renewed discernment process. And it is the renewed discernment process diverse enough to be open and accessible to people who may not have had access to further or higher education, and or people who are neurodiverse? And did the discussions around adapting the process of discernment involve professionals in those areas who could advise on ways to ensure it is accessible to those groups of people? And that part of the question particularly, I think, feels relevant for people with neurodiversity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Geraint John, elected cleric, Diocese of Llandudno. The report recognises that there's work to be done in the coming months with the DDOs, the DDM, to promote and support vocations. Tristan mentioned that we're looking for ministers who are diverse, and the St Padans report recognises the increasing candidates with neurodiversities. So as part of that process, can I ask that particular attention is given to the formal vocations of our neurodiverse sisters and brothers, particularly those with autism, and how we can foster vocations to lay an ordained ministry in this area. I'm aware of a number of individuals who would make great deacons and priests, some with an impressive grasp of theology, liturgy and church history, which far surpasses my own knowledge and understanding. But whilst feeling called to ordination, some may not necessarily feel called to be a traditional vicar with overall responsibility of a church or ministry area, and this is preventing them from presenting themselves as a potential candidate for ministry. We're missing out then on the vocations of some extremely talented, prayerful, committed and knowledgeable individuals. So can I encourage the bench, our DDOs, our DDMs and St Padans to give some serious thought to the way in which we as a church can encourage those with neurodiversities so that we don't miss out on those gifts and talents that these people can bring to the church, particularly within the sphere of ordained and licensed ministry.
Ian Yem, elected cleric from Llandudno. Tomorrow morning I'll be facilitating a formational cell group of full-time ordinands at St Padans. It's a role I've had now for 2 years, and not so long ago I benefited from being in such a group. I welcome the renewed focus on formation. I am aware that the formational cell process will change, and that tutors from inside the organisation will take on the role of facilitating these groups, something which has worked well around the province amongst part-time students. I would just like to ask the question, have you been able to gather some feedback from existing students who are going to be impacted by this change? It does change the nature of the space of the formational cell, and how will you continue to monitor how effective that change is? Thank you.
Mark Clavier, Diocese of Swansea and Brecon. I wanted to talk just a moment about the issue of clergy well-being, because I think this is perhaps among the top 2 or 3 priorities of the church right now. I've been in the ministry in 3 different provinces. You can tell from my accent, not all on this side of the Atlantic. And in my entire ministry, I have never known clergy and churches to be as demoralized as we are now. This is not just the church in Wales, but this is across the churches in the West. Some of this has to do with geopolitics and cultural changes and social changes, but a lot of this has to do with the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis in our ministry. One of the things I'm very conscious of as a Yank is the power of the narrative of decline here. That many of us sitting around tables here have never experienced a growing church, have never known what it's like to minister within a growing church and the energy that is provided by that. Speaking particularly to the rural context, I'm very conscious of clergy and lay leaders who are put in ministerial context that would be demanding to Jesus Christ himself, I suspect, where the provision of ministry that they feel responsible for providing and find it difficult because the structures and the expectations make it difficult to say no. So I would make an appeal. I heartily commend the work that's being done in terms of providing some well-being services, but that we need to give further attention to how we structure our ministries to allow clergy to thrive, and how we develop cultures in which clergy can thrive. And I'll give you one example that will tie into something that was just said in that regard. One of the things that really struck me when I came into ministry in the UK, and this was in the Church of England, but this is true in the Church in Wales as well, was that there was nothing like what I had known in America in the congregations, that part of their role as members of that congregation was to look after their clergy. I think it will be very difficult for us to get to a position of thriving in our ministries until we have that embedded in the ongoing life of our congregations. So one of the things I think that's incumbent on us all to take back to our churches is to find ways, and for the church to help people to find ways to develop that culture, so that we know that as we are ministering to our people, they are ministering to us as well. Thank you.
Moira Randall, co-opted lay Llandudno. We didn't conspire on this, but that's exactly what I wanted to say. I personally am so pleased that there is a range of initiatives being introduced for the well-being of clergy, which has been of concern from me personally, looking at my clergy in my ministry area for such a long time. And certainly as a former lay chair and speaking as a member of the laity, I want to say this. Just as we look to you, our clergy, for your care and your pastoral support, then we too should be looking after you. And I certainly call upon all ministry area lay chairs and members of their ministry area councils that it is your role and responsibility to ensure that your clergy are taking time off, that are taking that rest period, that are looking after themselves. Because if you don't look after us, we can't look after you, and vice versa. Bishop Cherry said in her address that be we 6 years of age or 60 years of age or whatever age we are called to baptism, we are therefore all called to ministry. Yesterday we heard such powerful words about loving each other, or being friends to each other. And I genuinely believe that that compassion and that care and that love is shared by all of us. So thank you for creating these initiatives for our wonderful clergy. And I call genuinely upon all of us to look after our clergy. Thank you.
Andy Grimwood, Archdeacon St. Asaph. I suppose this is a question really for Jeremy, but I'm wondering, as he was saying that the number of ordinands in St. Paddens is remaining steady, I was wondering whether we know whether there is a socio-economic breakdown in those figures, i.e. what is being done to attract people from, shall we say, lower class backgrounds, socio-economic status, without academic ability? And are there training opportunities for those who are not, I suppose, capable of O-levels, A-levels, degrees, whose experience and talents is more practical? So I suppose I'm asking a similar question to Geraint, but on class, socio-economic, academic ability. And do we have that information, and are those opportunities available yet? Thank you.
Ben Jones, elected cleric, Diocese of Swansea and Brecon. I just wanted really to commend the work of St. Paddens. As a relatively recent graduate from St. Paddens, I found the time together, the time to build relationships, the time to come together in fellowship, to be really helpful, and has helped sustain me in those first 3 years of ministry. When we've got a problem, we can go to each other, we support each other, but also to just reflect on Jeremy's little donut slide about being positive about the church in Wales, because too often the narrative is one of decline, the narrative of one of negativity, and I'd just like to encourage us perhaps to think how we can be positive about the church in Wales, because we proclaim our Lord Jesus Christ, we have hope in him, we have faith in him, and we need to encourage each other and support each other and build each other up in that. And also just really to say that St. Paddens enabled that to happen, because we have come together as young clerics, recently ordained, and we can support each other. But also to welcome as well Tristan's well-being stuff, because we all know that that is important, to support each other, to encourage each other, and to build each other up. And I think it just builds on that narrative of togetherness. So thank you, just to commend St. Paddens, and also to thank Tristan for the well-being. Thank you.
Lastly, Bishop Dorian, the lighting was ready for a dramatic entrance.
Cymraeg. Well, first of all, I want to reiterate what others have said about the care and the pastoral work for clerics. altogether through the all the dioceses. It's really important that we make sure that we prepare the clerics all through Wales, that they have the care and the love and all the support. But recently, when I was preaching to vicars and clerics in the St David's diocese, I had to concentrate on the importance that clerics need to take responsibility for their holidays, to make sure that they get a chance to be with their families and to wind down and to relax. And without that, we can't expect any kind of continuous ministry that will make a difference in our different dioceses.
So what I'm saying to clergy in my diocese, and I think this is very important for them to realize, and I hope those of you who are here today, is that provision has been made for you to have holidays, to take days off, 2 days off extra in a month. You must take this time. You cannot afford not to look after yourselves. And as Moira quite rightly said, congregations and local ministry areas must ensure that this happens. But I know that I speak on behalf of my colleagues that it is an expectation and a part of your ministry that you do take time for yourselves and for your families. Burnout is not an option. We have to be resilient, refreshed, and rested for the task that lies ahead. And that task is the proclamation of the kingdom of Jesus. We have to realize that our Lord took time to rest. He took time to be on his own, to pray, to be with his friends and with his family. That expectation is expected of you also. And I appeal to all local ministry areas to ensure that clergy meet the expectation not only of providing full and effective ministry, but also full and effective rest, reflection, and realization that they are merely human beings who depend upon the power of an eternal God. And sometimes we can only do that by going to be by ourselves with him. So I appeal to all clergy, be responsible for your time off. You shouldn't have to expect your laity to tell you to take time, or your wives or your husbands or your children. Take your time off. It is of importance and it is imperative. And I want to commend Tristan for the wonderful work that he does with his colleagues to ensure that we realize this. So please, my dear sisters and brothers in Christ, let us take it very seriously for our own well-being and the good of the people of God, whom we are privileged to be called to serve.
Bishop Jerry, inviting you to respond to that. I suppose Jeremy and Tristan may also, if they wish.
We've been avidly trying to decide who's going to respond to which question as they've come in. But thank you very much to all of you who've raised points and asked questions. Just very briefly, I'm going to take a few. One of them is Hayley's. Thank you, Hayley. I think we're all very aware of how devastating it is when people go through the process and then are not recommended. And I think we all have to be mindful. In my view, it's the bishop's responsibility along with the DDO. And I know that Tristan works closely with the DDOs, has been having those kinds of conversations about what support mechanisms can be put in place, how we can encourage people to look perhaps more widely at what their ministry might be so that they're not just left without anything. But it is certainly something that we need to be as mindful as we can be about. And Tristan and I will have further conversations around that, as I will with my Episcopal colleagues. I'd like to take Tony's and Moira's and Mark part 2, questions around clergy wellbeing, clergy care, and just the sheer weight of responsibility that clergy carry. We've heard Bishop Dorian's plea for clergy to look after themselves, and I know that a lot of our laity are very mindful about looking after their clergy. One of the things that we've done in the Diocese of Monmouth, which may be something that you'd like to think about in your own diocese, is that we've drawn up a wellbeing guide which sets out good practice in terms of self-care and mutual care, what is good practice and what to absolutely avoid: overwork, working on holidays, not taking holidays because you've got too much work, all those kinds of things. It's just a little guide, but it does actually set out some parameters that might actually help people, clergy and lay licensed ministers, to look after themselves and for the laity to support them in that work. Mark's other question around the structures, I think is a really important one. I think there's something around ministry and being a priest that means that the job is never done. I think even if you've only got one church, one parish, one population and congregation, you will always go to bed as a parish priest knowing that there are things to do that either you haven't had time to do or have got to be bumped on to the next day. The work of a parish priest is never done, which is why whether it's one church or 20 churches or whatever it is, we have to learn to set realistic priorities. God only asks us to do what is possible. And our task is to decide what the priorities need to be and accept that there will be a lot of things that we just can't do. One of the beauties of ministry areas, certainly in the way they're set up in Monmouth Diocese, is that they are served by ministry teams. So a cleric never works on their own. They're always part of a team, which means that there's inbuilt mutual support from within the ministry team as well as from the laity as well. But I think part of it is recognising that we will never be able to do anything, and therefore being able to prioritise and focus on the most important things and not feel guilty when there are things that we just cannot humanly do. God doesn't ask us to be martyrs, but it's a really important point, and I know a lot of ministry areas are set up in a way where you've got very few clergy looking after multiple churches, sometimes 20 and over. Thank you for those questions. I'm going to invite Tristan and Jeremy to respond to the others, if you may.
Thank you, Bishop Cherry. I'm going to take the questions from Rebecca and Geraint and a bit from Andy as well. The candidates from different educational or socio-economic backgrounds, it is something that we have thought about and talked about in many meetings as far as the discernment process is concerned. The whole point with the move towards stage one was with this in mind, that the stage one Zoom conversations are conversations, they're not interviews. And the whole point with the qualities is that they are not to be seen as criteria to be assessed. So it takes us away from the sort of educational language that we had to a more open language and a more affirming language. And we also have been talking about the research that's been done by the Church of England on candidates from council estates, which has been really useful, but it would be also good to contextualize that and Cymrify it and see, well, what about Wales? Because we have our own impacts, our own challenges. My wife works on the Penrhys estate in the valleys, and so I know something of that, and so we are discussing that as well. So very early days, but it is on our agenda to discuss and consider. Neurodiverse candidates, many families by now have had experience of this. We ourselves, my son is being assessed for ADHD, and we've got the funding through Clergy Support Trust. So that again links to well-being, and that needs to be known across Wales how much funding the Clergy Support Trust can offer clerics and their families, which we are told by the director of the Clergy Support Trust is not being taken up by Welsh clerics. But yes, so there are many families with experience, and I had an email last week from Bishop Gregory about this, and I met with Mike Haslam, the Director of Transforming Ministry of St Asaph, earlier this week about neurodiverse candidates. It is something that's already discussed on our agenda. The Stage 1 documentation and the Stage 2 documentation have sections on reasonable adjustments. We're also moving towards a reasonable adjustment neurodiverse passport, as we call it, because we're having so many candidates who are doing that anyway. So we thought, well, why not have a template so people can let us know what they need from us on their panels. I've also advertised quite widely amongst candidates and amongst the DDOs Zoom training sessions by Katie Tupling from the Diocese of Oxford on neurodiversity and disability, and M. Coley on the same. I completely agree with Jeremy that the Church of England don't always do it better over the border, but sometimes they do it pretty well. So why don't we use what they actually are doing? And so we have started discussions with them, with their ministry division, with Dr. Caris Walsh about neurodiverse candidates, and those discussions are ongoing. I'm pleased to say that we have expertise in our province. We have experience in our province, even within Callahan Square. Our former coordinator of the panel, Ellie Ballard, has expertise and experience, and our present coordinator, Edward, has expertise and experience of neurodiversity. So I just wanted to reassure you, it's early days, but we are thinking about it, and we are talking about it.
A few questions I'm picking up there. First of all, going to Ruth about the NLM programme. Okay, so those not in stipendiary ministry definitely can go on that intentional leadership phase. If their bishop indicates that they wish a particular NSM or the like to go on that second part, you remember the question was about that intentional leadership phase. If the bishop indicates they want that to happen, that's what happens. And that's perhaps an insight into how St. Padans works. We may say there's these structures. All of that is about normal. We then interface with the bishops about individuals. So there is a challenge there, of course, because the NSM, who is a full-time teacher, tends to find that they are quite busy. And the idea of further investment is a good thing, but further investment from the church, meaning more courses and more time, is not always welcome. So there's a balance to be struck. But in answer to the question, you're right, it's not written into the report, which says basically this is for the stipendiaries. In actual fact, it's also for those not in stipendiary ministry that their bishops indicate they would benefit from. The question going from Ian about full-time formational cells, the move to formational cells, he's very much on the money on that. This is something that is in the process of happening, and he is right to comment very politely that it's causing some ripples. Let me just explain about this. The move for those formational cells, these formational groups, to being staff-led, was itself a response to student feedback in the past. We brought it in for our part-time candidates first because they were the ones who would most benefit from the sense of a closer connection with the core staff, because they were the ones who felt most distant from the staff. What's happened with the part-time is to begin with they were nervous, but by this point in the year they've all decided, well, maybe not all, but the feedback is it's a really good thing. However, it is true that among our full-time ordinands there is an anxiety about this at the moment. This has come to us through our student feedback processes over the last, the last 3 or 4 months, both sort of formal and informal processes, and we are doing quite a lot of intense work on this at the moment. If we're honest, it's intriguing for us because the idea that those formational groups were meant to provide a confidential space away from the staff was never their purpose. And all the handbooks are clear that they're not fully confidential because those groups were always feeding in to the formational reports to bishops. So the initial response from staff was, we don't quite understand. What's being taken away is something that was never there in the first place. However, we've then sort of stepped back and thought, but clearly something is being taken away, even if we didn't think it was what those groups meant to be. This anxiety is something we need to listen to try to understand. These groups were clearly performing a function that wasn't maybe their main function, but they were doing something. So we've got a lot of intense, so it's absolutely on the money question at the moment. We're doing quite a lot of intense listening to people. We have confidential spaces. We've got a great confidential chaplain. Of course, the full-time ordinands, they're only on site in college 3 days a week. They have lots of access to, spiritual directors, people in their ministry areas, but there is an anxiety there, and we're trying to get to the bottom of it. We'll be reporting on that internally back to our Quality and Standards panel, which was concerned about this issue in February, and we'll be reporting back on that. So we're trying on that one. The questions, just to link back to the question about social economic questions and the neurodiversity, on the Archdeacon Andy's question about social economic, I care about this a lot. All my parish ministry was in very high areas on the index of multiple deprivation. On behalf of my colleagues, I do want to say our evidence of how people who are on our courses feel supported and help to succeed is good. We're trying to do some new things like the apprentice programme, because I think we've got to be careful on not saying qualifications are not for people from working class backgrounds or lower prior education achievement backgrounds. I know Andy wasn't saying that. We're going to be careful. We've got to tie into the current framework for training and development in the country. Apprenticeships are a big thing. It's about how to have good ways in to training for people for whom education hasn't been a good thing in the past. It's not about avoiding training and education. So we've tried to do something with apprentices. Our current performance with people is quite good, but there is an issue. There is a gap. People are not coming forward. And that's something for us to work with Tristan. The final point on that is it's difficult for us at St Paddens. We need those wider conversations. To what extent is this something St Paddens can really contribute to? Or is this really the work of ministry areas and dioceses? Because particularly the front end of work with people from working class backgrounds who've been failed in education in the past needs to be face-to-face and local. And we can't do face-to-face and local in every community across Wales. So we need some more joined up thinking and working, and perhaps some of us ought to get together on that. We need to contribute, but it's not an issue we can solve on our own. In relation to neurodiversity, we have just added a part-time staff member, Emma Rawlinson, coming to us highly specialised in this area, getting away from tutors who are well-meaning, trying to learn up. She's got all the specialism qualifications, coming to us from university where she was holding a post about this. She's just started with us a month ago. So we are trying to really build the expertise about this. And on the statistics about neurodiversity, it's interesting. We have 27% of our ministerial candidates declare some form of disability. Now, in the language, disability covers this whole range of things, whether you might think of them as additional learning needs or whatever. But 27% of people. So this is why it's a big challenge for us, a big challenge for the RB to invest in. 27% of people. In terms of neurodiversity, we have 15.6% of people identifying with neurodiversity, which is very slightly higher than the population. In one sense, that's good news, because it does show that folks are not being put off. You know, we actually have a slightly higher percentage than the population. It does raise a challenge. We're investing to try to deal better with that. It's a big area in HE at the moment, and it's one of the areas where our tie into HE works because we have to respond to these agendas. We can't choose not to. There were some legal cases last summer about the responsibilities universities and those offering university courses have to people with different neurodiversity. So it's a big issue for us. But also, my final comment is, of course, it's an issue that has to then go forward in ministry. If people are well supported in training, the challenge is going to be how that then continues to be well supported when they're a curate or a team vicar or whatever. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very mindful that we're not far off 1 o'clock, and there are one or two other things I know that the Archbishop wants to and needs to say. So can I invite you just for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, just to have a brief conversation together. Jot down, please, on a piece of paper that we ask you to leave on the table about a priority or a couple of priorities that you think we need to focus on in the next 5 years in relation to ministry. That would be really helpful for us. Thank you.
Not been provided with pens and paper, but I'm sure someone will have pen and paper.
I'm sure they will.
Andrew, Archbishop. We're coming to the end of our meeting. Before we finish, there are some important formalities to attend to, and I want to begin with farewells. There are a number of people for whom this will be their last GB, and rather than embarrassing them by naming them, I know who you are. Thank you so much for all that you've given to the work of the governing body. It's so appreciated. We know in one sense you come from your diocese, but what you contribute to the whole is so appreciated. However, there are two people who've made a very particular, I suppose, public contribution to the national life of the church. And I wish to mention, to begin with, Mr. Mike Wakeman, who's been leading the Church in Wales IT department for 2 years and has done excellent work on projects like the membership app and the My Church People app and the DBS and safeguarding systems. But of course, prior to that appointment, Mike spent 6 years as part of the RB's communication team, so he's been part of our life for much longer than his most recent appointment. He maintained the Church in Wales website in that time, closely involved in introducing new versions of provincial and diocesan websites in 2018. He's been an ever-present part of our governing body since 2016, managing all of the backstage technology and improving enormously the quality of our web streaming. Mike has determined that he wants to work more closely with AI technologies, which has been a theme of our GB, and so plans to establish a business operating in that sector. Mike, we're going to miss you enormously. The ease with which it has been so, it's been so easy working with you. It's been great working with you, and the enormous work in the background that you have done for us has meant that we've been able to discharge our work here at GB so easily. Can I ask you to come to the front, please? As Mike comes down, would you like to show your own appreciation for all that Mike's given?
I'm actually terrible at public speaking. I've practiced and practiced and practiced over the years, and I don't get much better. But I just wanted to say two things. One, it has been a great pleasure getting to know many of you and working for the Church in Wales. I will miss you. I wish you all the very, very best. God bless.
Thank you. I also wish to mention the Reverend James Tout, who's been my chaplain for just over 3 years, and you will know James because he's been the governing body's worship coordinator for almost all of that time. James has been a constant source of wisdom and encouragement. He's not only helped our focus and on attending to the big questions that we face as a church, but he's engaged so well with all of you. He has been such a safe pair of hands when he has needed to step up to the plate and deputise on my behalf. I've had enormous confidence in him. And so it's a matter of great personal loss to me, as it is to us as a GB, that he's moving on. But I know that you'd want to congratulate him as he moves to become Vicar of St Giles, Wrexham and Mission Hub leader there, a significant responsibility and a mark of the esteem and the credit in which he is held across the Church in Wales and in the two dioceses in which he has been perhaps most closely associated. Could I ask you, James, come down to the front as well?
You never expect to have to do a speech at GB when you're staff, but here we are. I'm not sure which hat I'm wearing right now, because I think as of 1 o'clock, I've ceased to be the Archbishop's chaplain, so we're 5 minutes past. So I don't want to hold that. It has been the pleasure of a lifetime over the last 3 years at least. It has been incredible. The places I've been able to go, the things that we've been able to achieve over the last 3 years have been huge. I thank you all. Every single one of you has played a part in that, and it has been a joy. And so it's more of a see you later than a farewell. And hopefully I may see you back here soon. But thank you very much.
And of course, as well as thanking James for his work, we wish him and Lucy every happiness as they prepare for their wedding in just about a week's time. And so to end, the next meeting of the GB will be on Wednesday and Thursday, the 10th and 11th of September at the University of Wales Trinity St David, Lampeter. I'd like to thank a number of people who've made our meeting take place, all the staff who've been involved in arranging this meeting. We're so grateful to all of you. Your work in the background is deeply appreciated. We're so grateful for all that you contribute. Our translator during the meeting has been Miss Sioned Jones. Diolch I chi, Sioned, am eich gwaith. All the members who've undertaken particular tasks, such as the chairs and in arranging our worship, have mentioned James already. I'd like to thank enormously Archbishop Mark O'Toole, Dr. Monica Attias, Archdeacon Rod Green, Moira Randall, and Archdeacon Dr. Hayley Matthews for their contributions in worship in particular. Highlights will be available on the website within about 2 weeks of the meeting, and that is, of course, a valuable aid for members reporting back to their own mission and ministry areas. Shall we just have a moment of quiet? For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith, and this not from yourselves, it is the gift of God. Would you please stand? May God, who is able to do infinitely more than we ask or imagine, fill you all now with joy and peace in believing. A bendith Dyw holl alluog a tad, y mab a'r ysbryd glân, a fo yn eich blith, ac a drigo gyda chwi nawr ac am byth. Amen. Alleluia, Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed.
Alleluia.